So the idea of the perfect product and this 10-star experience, I think where Google has lost its way as it relates to AI is they're not thinking in those terms, because there's no world where how they're kind of shoving AI into this existing search experience is anywhere close to the perfect product. If you had to start with a fresh slate and you said, design for me an information search experience that is a 10 out of 10, a 20 out of 10, you wouldn't have this like weird thing where you're jamming ads in and you're trying to pull in a search overview and then you got some blue links. Like, it's just not, it's awkward.
Welcome to DeepTech. That's Doug Clinton. I am Gene Munster. We've got three topics today. The first is we wanted to go over our AI summit that Deepwater hosted recently and included representatives from OpenAI, Databricks, Anthropic, and then we've got a bunch of companies that we've invested, AI companies that are on the smaller side in our early stage venture fund that also joined the conversation. And when we kind of put it all together, I thought I was going to go into this or leave our AI summit with this ammunition of all the different ways that AI is being put to use today that I didn't realize, because we get asked that question a lot. And I left a little bit flat-footed, and the conclusion is actually positive, but I wanted to start there. Effectively, when we ask these companies what the most powerful examples, use cases of AI today are, it came back to coding, which is Google talked a lot about today at their I/O Dev conference, and separately customer service. And I feel like this is about as well-traveled of a road as we've seen. I think we've been talking about that for the past year. And so I was just, from that perspective, I was a little bit disappointed.
Yeah, and I'll throw a shout out to some of our portfolio companies that came: Invisible, Hydra, Not Diamond, Chief. I think we saw a lot of really cool applications that our portfolio companies are building and starting to bring into enterprise. And that was really the focus, I'd say, of the audience. But the TLDR of what you just said is that we keep saying it's early in AI. It's actually probably even earlier than most people realize. When you think about actual enterprise adoption, I remember we did sort of like a buzz survey in the room, about 120 people, I think, in the audience. A lot of people from local Minnesota Fortune 500 companies, businesses in Minnesota. And I think maybe 2 people of 120 raised their hand when they said they sort of had like ongoing AI projects at their enterprises that were creating real value. So that's how early it is. But to your point, I left optimistic, like you just said, because on the other side of that is every company, every hand in the room said, we know we need to figure out AI because there is value there, but we need to figure out what are the right use cases, then who can help us build, right, or plug in the right tools to address those use cases and help us get more out of our business going forward.
So what does the gap look like between our optimism and the optimism that this is going to be profound and be bigger than what the internet is and mobile combined, and the reality that we're at today? Is that gap like just faith that these models will keep advancing? Is it pattern recognition that we've seen the advancements and there's a debate in terms of the pace of advancements? Meta last week, a story in the Journal that suggests it's taking a little bit longer. If you listen to Sundar from Google today, it sounds like they're making as much progress as fast as they ever have in terms of Gemini improvements. And so how do we get comfortable that it's not just hype, that ultimately that this other piece is going to present itself?
I think it's 2 things. One is it's actual experience from us at Deepwater. You know, we've built an AI native company. We've spun out of Deepwater Intelligent Alpha. And so we've seen examples of how can AI create unique workflows? How can AI create unique value? In the case of Intelligent Alpha, we're using AI to do human analyst work, to pick stocks, to be a portfolio manager. And so there's one application, one specific use case that we defined, built a product around, and now we have that, and that company is built entirely around that thesis.
So that's a good use case, intelligent alpha, and how, like, just what we're doing here at Deepwater. And I would guess that, I mean, we heard this at the summit, is the reason why people were there is they wanted to figure out, they had their own idea about how to move forward, and the idea about why and how they want to use AI. They struggle, I think, with sometimes those steps about moving forward. And that was another piece that I left more confident in, is just the whole consulting piece around AI. I like to think of, investing in companies that have, a lot of hard tech that's defensible, and alien founders, all of that. But those alien founders are also building companies that are helping, basically hold people's hands to really get these applications in. And that was something that jumped out to me, is like, there's a huge opportunity here on the consulting side that I think is being underappreciated by investors.
It is. And I mean, a portfolio company for us, Invisible, is really trying to attack that. And I'd say between the experience with Intelligent Alpha, sort of building an AI first company, and then with Invisible, where we're trying to help established enterprises who are definitionally not AI first. They're very much human first because they're older businesses. Between those two experiences, I've sort of, I think, seen this framework of, what works, how does something start, and then how does it evolve, where, when are we going to be saying, oh, it's so obvious that AI has had this huge impact on all these businesses? And there's kind of like four parts. I think there's sort of four steps. And step one, to me, is this idea of like intangible leverage. And so you go back to those examples you gave at the beginning, right? Coding as an example. What we're seeing with coding, or customer service as another example, in many cases, those tools are helping to augment existing human processes. So existing dev teams can write more code, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that means they don't have to hire the incremental junior dev or something like that. The reason I call that intangible leverage is because you're essentially not having to pay for something that would be sort of like a nice to have but not need to have. So it probably never really shows up on your operating line otherwise. Because the second step in this kind of framework is tangible leverage. So it's like at that point, AI gets to be so good at whatever it's doing that you can actually reduce your human workforce. And so we saw kind of a fun example, maybe I shouldn't say fun when human workforce is reduced, but we saw an example from Microsoft this past week, where they reduced their workforce by, I think it was 3%. And there were some stories out about that, where a lot of that was, it sounds like it was AI driven, where they were getting so much leverage out of some of the AI use cases and tools that they could actually remove some human components. So that's tangible leverage. Like, you'll actually see that in the bottom line. The third step to me then is what I would call tangible growth. So the first two parts of this framework are about operating leverage, so reducing
Higher
expenses,
margins
helping
in the second case.
exactly. You're fighting for margin because you can get more from less with AI. The second two pieces of the framework are actually improving the top line, right? And I think that this is a little bit harder to do, but the third piece, I call this sort of tangible growth, where you're somehow leveraging AI, whether that's through maybe unique marketing services, sales support, things like that, where you can point to an AI tool and say, look, it helped me increase my sales by 10%, something like that. Then the final step, and this is where I think AI is sort of,
By the way, on that
off to the
front,
races.
I think on the sales improvement front, I think Meta is a great example. Despite everything that the journal's reporting, the fact that they've increased their DAUs, growth went from 5 to 6%, small acceleration. If you want to, definitionally, it is an acceleration, but you're talking 3.2 billion people daily. That's a hard number to get moving. And their advertising growth, they grew at 16% in the March quarter. They guided, if you look at the high end of the range for the June quarter, which they'll probably hit, it's the same 16% off of a harder comp. And so from my perspective on that revenue piece, I think Meta is a good example. I'll let you keep rolling here to point number 4, but it's worth noting that there are examples out there of AI at scale that are having an impact on revenue growth.
Yeah, I would probably bet that Meta, of probably any company in the world, they've probably actually had the most dollar value increase in their top line from AI that you could probably fairly directly attribute to AI, between DAU growth, right, engagement, and then also I think improved ad, right, A/B testing and things that they're doing with the copy. So anyway, that's tangible growth, and I think Facebook Meta absolutely fits in that category. And the fourth one, and I don't think anybody's really doing this yet, but this is where the world is going, in my opinion, is sort of this idea of intangible growth, where at this point you sort of have AI agents operating within your business that know your customers, that know your products so well that they sort of create new opportunities and even potentially new products, right, without any human guidance. And it's sort of like this AI flywheel. Like, this is what every business should want to get to, and that's a 5 to 10 year, maybe even more than that, aspiration. But I think that's the logical progression for most businesses. Is you start with something like Cursor, with coding. You start with something in the customer service place. You get that intangible growth. You just see what AI can do. Then you get into tangible growth. You get AI that's so good you can start to remove some of your human workforce. And the challenge there is obviously political. Then you get into the tangible growth piece where you're actually accelerating your top line. And then finally, once AI understands your entire organization, it kind of takes a course of its own.
And then the human would sign off in
Mm-hmm.
most cases.
Yeah. And that depends on how far out in the future you want to kind of predict,
Take it,
right?
yeah. The
Where I
sign
think
off, I
that
think, would be, it's got to be some like gut check on whatever the machine's doing.
yeah, I think there's value in this concept. We've talked about like a human oversight layer, where
Mm-hmm.
think about a lot of different businesses, particularly in like services, for example. What you're selling in the past probably was the literal service.
Mm-hmm.
But I would argue now that, like, take accounting, right? AI is a better accountant than almost anybody that's gone to a 4 year program and done their CPA, all that stuff. AI can just do better. But what those businesses now sell is trust. They sell the human touch, right? And they sell this concept, I think, of, look, if something went wrong with my numbers, am I going to blame the AI or am I going to blame the human who said this is okay? You ultimately want to go back to a human, I think, and say you have responsibility for this, and that's where the value is.
Makes total sense. Awesome. Let's jump to our second topic, which is Google. It's been quite a wild ride here. And just rewinding recently at EQ under being called to the courtroom relative to this Department of Justice and Google conversation about potentially breaking up, testified that for the first time ever, search declined on Safari browser. Google quickly came back and said on iOS, overall searches are going up, and you can fill in the blanks that searches aren't going down much on Safari plus Chrome, and Android-based searches are going up on iOS. And so, but either way you cut it, it really sent a shockwave. And the shockwave was that something is changing in search. And today at Google I/O, when they kicked off search, the first comment, I'm going to read it to you here, was in just 1 year. So this is the search section of I/O, 2 hour keynote. The first comment was, in just 1 year, there's been a profound shift in how people use search. And I think that's kind of what Eddie's picking up on. I think that's what the stock traded down 7%. And then since then, it's been up a couple percent where the NASDAQ's been flat. So it's recovered a little bit of that. But overall, like, this topic still is orbiting the Google conversation. And the basic topic is you go to more of a generative, simple search result that doesn't have sponsored ads, blue links. If that's what consumers ultimately want, how does Google's business model, which 55% of the revenue, and I estimate 85% of earnings, comes from search, how do you replace that? And so I'm just going to keep moving us forward in the conversation because we have some updates today. They told us a lot at I/O, including their answer to that is AI mode. This is a new mode that they're rolling out in the US. It's going to be a tab for those who still access Google on google.com. There'll be a tab there. If you're in a search bar, you won't be able to access it. But the idea is that you get that generative result. They're still wrapping ads on the side and bottom of it for a lot of those, but at least you can go deeper in a conversation. Like with AI overviews, you can't kind of keep that conversation going. In the case of AI mode, it looks like you can kind of start to narrow things down, and it's definitely better than what they have, but still they're not ripping the Band-Aid off. And my thoughts were, stock ended up trading down a couple percent. from the beginning of when the keynote started at the end, because I think investors just want something more. I think they want to show them really embracing this innovator's dilemma question more aggressively.
I'm going to invoke two broad concepts that I think are attributable to like where Google's at, right? The innovator's dilemma is like the classic explanation, but there's two things I've heard recently or been thinking about recently that I think are relevant. One is literally just earlier today, Elon Musk did an interview on CNBC. He had this quote that caught my ear that stuck with me, and he said it's like we're trying to create the platonic ideal of the perfect product. So that's idea one. Idea two is Brian Chesky from Airbnb. He's famous for having this like 10-star, like what is a 10-star experience? Many people maybe have heard of this before, but it's like everything's 5 stars, right? And it's like for the most part, when you get a 5-star rating, it's like you were perfectly fine and like everything was good
Doesn't
and
tell you much.
the bed was clean. Yeah. And so his thing was like, well, imagine what's a 6-star experience? What's a 7? What's an 8? And it's like, what's a 10-star experience? And he was like, a 10-star experience with Airbnb is you show up and like Elon Musk takes you to the moon on a SpaceX, shuttle, and then brings you back down, and you have, lunch at the best restaurant in Paris, and then you go to your Airbnb or whatever. So the idea of the perfect product and then this 10-star experience, I think where Google has lost its way as it relates to AI is they're not thinking in those terms, because there's no world where how they're kind of shoving AI into this existing search experience is anywhere close to the perfect product. If you had to start with a fresh slate and you said, design for me an information search experience that is a 10 out of 10, a 20 out of 10, you wouldn't have this like weird thing where you're jamming ads in and you're trying to pull in a search overview and then you got some blue links. Like it's awkward, and I think like it's probably obvious to say that they're trying to have their cake and ice cream too, as we like to say at Deepwater. Like it's just not working. And I don't know what the answer is. That's the hard thing, right? Because you could say, all right, fine, well, let's just milk search. That's one option. Or you could just rip off the Band-Aid and kill search. That's your other option. Neither one seems really good.
Mm-hmm. Well, I went into IO thinking they weren't going to really say much about search. I knew they had to say a little bit about it, but they spent more time on it than I was expecting it. And as they were going through it, my initial reaction when I first saw AI mode was, here we go again. This is like a repackaged AI overview, still not answering the question, still not what I want, still not going to change the reality that I'm going to do more query searches, call what you want on Grok or GPT. But there is, I watched it twice, the demo, and the piece around inspiration stood out to me. And they talked about this shopping piece, and that's something that I don't think GPT does a good job of inspiring anything. They give you the answer, but there really is no inspiration. When I think about like Google and all the history that they have about how the world works, like that's something that's unique. And is that when you think about building products, I mean, the inspiration piece is a commerce related search prompt. And so I wondered, could they effectively, or just separately, they have, if you just want to go deep on a topic, they call it deep research, which that's what they're all calling it. But that basically, I think it's going to kind of filter out the ads. And they're making, you just want to learn how to do this math problem. And so they, my sense is that they're understanding like where they're good and where they're not. And maybe it's just too clumsy, but we have 2.2 billion people use Google search daily. I was doing the math with Brian today, and we started to back into, they gave a little nugget in the keynote that you can, in terms of visual searches, how many visual searches there are. They said there's been 100 billion visual searches year to date. So that compares to basically, it's probably less than 1%. What do you think? What percentage of people's searches are visual?
Yeah, probably something like that.
Less
Sub
than
5 for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, okay. If it's 5, that means the average it's like 15 searches a day or something like that, and it's like 22 searches a day if it's less than 1. But my bottom line is there's just a lot of muscle memory here, And so they actually have, I think, this thing around inspiration and be able to kind of narrow down. And 1.7 of those 2.2 billion people really haven't used any of these chatbots. And is there an opportunity where they can just educate people and they can say, this is the product that you want? And they don't want, the average person doesn't want their Google ripped away from them. As much as I wish they would take the Band-Aid off, the average person doesn't want that. And basically, do they have a lot more time than we realize to figure all this out?
They probably have more
Well, I guess two
time.
questions there. Sorry. One is there something unique around inspiration that like only Google can do?
Yeah, well, I'll start with inspiration, then I'll do time second. Inspiration, I think, is a subjective thing to some degree. Where I know there's this concept out there where, like, you talk about millennials, Gen Z, really, like, how does Gen Z use AI and Google, right, differently than maybe millennials or Gen X? And the idea that I've seen, and I think it does make a lot of sense, is like Gen Z uses AI as sort of like an operating system. And so when we talk about this idea of inspiration, part of it might be that to get inspiration from AI, it does take work. It takes an ability to prompt in the right way, to have the right conversations. So if you're going to go to ChatGPT and you're going to go to Google and you're going to ask it like a similar question,
What kind of rug should
right?
I get?
Yeah, like I could Google be better at that? Should it? Actually, Google should be better than that. If your
It will
question is, well,
crush
what kind of rug
GPT.
should I get? Yeah, it should be better. Yes, I'm saying, I'm agreeing with you. But I don't know that in the long run, number one, if that is sustainable forever. Because again, think of it now. Think if you're a Gen Z person and your entire life, maybe for the next 5 years, is on GPT, is on ChatGPT, and they
Yeah.
know more about how you think about the world, what kind of aesthetic you like. They probably know what kind of weird stuff, images you're generating, right, with DALI or now, right on GPT. And they might be able to give you a killer recommendation for a rug,
Yeah. It all
right? So
comes
you have to
down to,
think about
so
where the world's going,
yeah.
I think. And so this idea of inspiration, I think, is it's hard to say like that Google's really inspiring. Can they help you find a product or nudge you towards something to buy better than GPT today? Yes, but in the future, I don't know how sustainable that advantage is.
So maybe on that front, they also gave a demo of uh, shopping for clothes online, and you used Google Visual and basically like scan your body and you keep your clothes on, and it figures out kind of your size, and then it helps find clothes that are a better fit. And I thought that's a good use case, but then again, Grok or GPT could add that just as easily.
Well, I think when we talk about use cases, like
By the way, they spent a lot of
to
time on the clothing thing. There was probably
yeah.
a good 5 minutes of the keynote was on that use case.
Well, it seems clear that they recognize, and I think this is good, Google recognizes that they have, at least for now, an inherent advantage in the commerce component of the internet, right?
Which
Not to
that's where
say
they
that
make their money too.
is where they make their money, but they also, I think, have an advantage from a data perspective, right? They know transactionally what people buy, to your point earlier. And so I think they need to figure out, can they sustain that advantage, or can they turn that advantage into something that is like truly unique and it pulls people maybe even away from GPT? Because I think if you just reskin Google search, like you're asking earlier, like how long is the tail? How long could it just take really long for this thing to go away? Or maybe it never goes away. Um, Things happen like really slowly then all at once in technology. That tends to be the way that it goes. And so if you had to make me guess, knowing everything we know today, like Google is like persistent for way longer than people realize, but then probably all of a sudden it's just like, whether it's a generational gap, somehow something just changes, and like the last generation that was using Google is just gone, right? It's like Facebook. I mean, think about Facebook and the transition
Yeah.
from how quickly Instagram took over and then TikTok took
Was
over.
that a
I mean,
rip
has
the
it?
band-aid off? Was Facebook to Instagram it was a rip the band-aid off, and it was totally different. I mean, some of the
No, it
rails were the
wasn't.
same.
I wouldn't say it was a rip the band-aid off, because I think they
Well,
also, Meta and Zuckerberg, had the foresight, right, to acquire Instagram. So I
but
think that gave them
they didn't rip the band. They
a
kept
lot of leeway.
Facebook around, but the products are very different. is my point.
I think the audiences are very different. And yeah, I mean, the experiences on both products are somewhat different. But I think it's, in my opinion, it's probably a little bit more about the audience and the use case
Yep.
than the experience.
Makes a ton of sense. Well, let's talk about the kind of the wind down on when the transition happened. So kind of some fun facts here. 2007, Netflix announces they're going to go streaming. They shut down their DVD business in 2023, 16 years later. True Grit, by the way, was the last DVD that they went in that DVD business. In fact, did have some serious grit to stick around that long. Red Box, Outer Wall, those you go to the gas station or grocery store, that also stuck around for 13 years. They basically closed them all in 2023 as well. So you have this long tail. If we go back and look at what happened with BlackBerry, so 2007 is when the iPhone came out. The stock started to trade down in like 2007, 2008. People saw the writing on the wall, but the growth rates of the businesses declined. But it actually revenue didn't peaked in 2011. So they slower growth rates, and that's why the stock goes down. But you have 2003 years, basically 4 years before the revenue actually started to decline. The first quarter of revenue decline was in 2012. And so when I think about those examples, and then I think about 15, 20, 25 times a day, 2.2 billion people use search, like from a sticky standpoint, it feels like Google, by that benchmark, has more time than these other ones, and these other ones stick around for a long time.
It probably does, and I would say the reality of that is it probably doesn't matter. Like that's the unfortunate thing
For the
because
stock or
the
for
yeah because the biggest contrarian call in the Mag 6 that anybody could make is to really love Google here.
right.
I think it's consensus to be worried about the transition to AI, GPT eating Google's lunch, right? And just this slow burn off. Like, I don't
Yep.
think anybody thinks search is going to fall off a cliff next quarter. But I also think you look at the multiple, it trades at the lowest multiple of all the Mag 6 names. I think it's, last time I looked at it, I think it was like 17 forward
Mm-hmm.
PE. And so it's like, it trades at a significant discount. And that's why. It's because there is this concern about what is the duration of the business? What's the durability? And I just don't see anything. It's hard to imagine like what Google could do. Now we've seen what they've been working
What
on at I/O today. And I don't think they answered the question. They certainly didn't make anybody super
the way
comfortable
they,
about it.
I think what
But
they could do is those 1.7 billion people who haven't made the decision yet just kind of get comfortable with AI mode, and it's good enough for them. It's not, it's just good enough.
in technology, good enough rarely wins. That would be my challenge to you is right. Like good enough, it's good enough for
Because
now,
that's
and
Yahoo.
that's the problem. Is like yeah, oh yeah, it's fine for me today, but what's GPT going to be able to do that Google can't? And maybe the answer is nothing, but
So
what's it going to look like in a year and 2 years and 3 years? And I think that's why, despite everything they announced today, I don't think you're going to see much leverage on that multiple from an idiosyncratic standpoint. Now, if all the Mag 6 go up, Google's probably going to go up too. But I think it's really hard to figure out how to alleviate that pressure on the multiple.
I'm in the same camp. Also, student of history, BlackBerry, the rallies, and I remember Redbox had these too, but BlackBerry, we'd have this concerns. The concerns started in kind of early 2008. From November 2008 to April 2009, the stock doubled up 94%. So you got one good quarter better than expected. There's another rally, September of 2009 to January of 2010. So 4 months, it had a 21% rally. And then middle of July to January of 2011, another 6 months, another 55% run. So you get some pretty big spikes. But once revenue growth turned negative, that was the end of the rallies. And so that's probably the question around Google, if in fact this has like a big risk. Right now, search grew at 10%. It's not like it has to come from 90% down to negative, like where BlackBerry was at. So you can we're relatively close to what that where things could actually turn negative. Let's
Yeah.
jump to our final topic.
I want to add one other thought on Google. This is last thing that kind of disappointed me. I was hoping they wouldn't do this, and they did because everybody's doing it in AI. But they announced Google Gemini Ultra. They're $250 a month, top tier product.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody's got that now. GPT, OpenAI has one, Claude has one, and I think that's a mistake from Google. I would have preferred, going back to the prior conversation, I would have preferred to have seen them say, we have so much financial leverage relative to the other closed source model builders that we can afford to make our best stuff free. Just give it away.
Yep.
Like, how do you beat OpenAI and how do you beat Claude as competitors? Just give literally your best stuff that they're charging people $250 a month for
But
away for free. That's a mistake.
But agree, it's a mistake. But it's a pretty small group that pays $250 a month, and these are like
Well, it
hard
doesn't. It's a small group because it's so expensive.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I believe there's a bigger group where if you said instead of the
Right.
base model just being normal Gemini 2.5, you get the Ultra, you get the deep. You know what I mean? Give it away.
Yep, I see your point. Yeah, that makes sense. Then everybody would love that. That's a good call. Final topic is Tesla. Yeah, Elon hitting the media pretty hard today. Did some webcasts at UAE, and then did like a couple segment interview with Dave Faber at CNBC. And one thing that jumped out was everything he's talking about, all the goodness. It's around autonomy. It's around 2026, 27, 28. And he talks about some of the deliveries being better this year, or demand is rebounded was the word that he used. Still think that they're going to come in below the street. I think deliveries will be down 11% this year. The street's looking for like down a few percent. So I think there's still some risk to that number. And when you kind of put it all together, is there anything that's going to make this stock go down?
Anything? I'm sure there's something.
I mean, I can't. Yeah, if Elon left, that's fair.
Right?
Elon,
Yeah.
take that out of the equation.
It feels like
he's going to stick around.
It feels like they've gone through Hades, over the last 6 months with the political headwinds. I think in particular, right now, translating into demand, and it's one of those things where you kind of look at it and say, like, how could it get any worse? And I mean, the answer is there's always some way it could get worse, but it does feel like at this point, a lot of the exogenous stuff that has really been hitting them hard has kind of passed. And I actually think it's funny. I actually saw this earlier. I didn't realize this, but over 1 year, so from last May, the stock's actually up like 90, almost 100%. I think it's like 97%. And when it feels like the stock's been terrible because it had such a run after the election, and then a dramatic fall, right, because of all the other things going on. But the bottom line is, like, if you've been this long-term holder, if you bought it a year ago, you're probably not feeling that bad about it. And I think that's probably always been the right perspective to look at with Tesla. Is trying to call any stock over a week or a month is always a fool's errand, and triply so with Tesla. But I think if you're thinking about the longer term, Elon's going to be there for the next 5 years. He just committed to that. And what they have coming, hopefully on time with Robotaxi, probably more updates from Optimus, it does feel like it's a stock that could find some, momentum here. And if they get the numbers going in the right direction, the stock probably works.
Feels like a great time to own it because the bar for this year is low. And if you believe that physical AI is going to be something, whether it's autonomous vehicles or humanoids or some form of other robotics, if you believe that that's where the world is going, there's no other company that's making that level of a bet at that scale than Tesla. And so as far as from my answer, what's going to make the stock go down would be if something happened to Elon. If Elon left, then there's like it's basically all rules we'll have to revisit at that point. But as long as that reality is out there that the world AI is going to capture the physical world, and as long as that's Tesla's North Star, I think the stock's just going to keep moving higher. And we're at just over $1 trillion market cap now. Who's to say it can't be multiple times bigger than that? And I as I say those words, I think forward to looking back in 2025, if it didn't work out, like how could I ever make such a crazy comment that this could be a 3, 4, $5 trillion company? And what, even despite that risk and not wanting to stick my neck out that far, despite that, I think it's the right answer. I think that that's ultimately what's going to happen is AI is going to capture the physical world. Tesla's going to have a great opportunity around. They're going to license FSD to a lot of automakers. They're going to have some ride chain business that's going to be a high margin. They'll figure out the robotics. It's probably 10 years plus. But as long as that opportunity is out there on the horizon, I think the stock keeps moving higher.
The only thing I'd add to that, and like I think about this much more philosophically probably than as a stock call, but Elon Musk is one of the most important people, and I'm not making like a political statement, but probably one of the most important people in business, one of the top 10 over the last 100 years. I don't think that that's a ridiculous statement, whether you agree or disagree with him politically. He's had such an impact from SpaceX, Tesla, PayPal, X. He's been all over the place. And so when you study impactful people in history, they often have these arcs in their lives where they go. Obviously, many of them come out of nowhere, and so you go from nobody to a hero, right? Everybody loves you, and then there tends to be a period where everybody turns on you, right? Or you get lost in the woods. You go back to Steve Jobs, right?
Was that what happened this
Hero,
year?
yeah, hero. When he started Apple, he kind of
Oh no, but
flamed out at
is
Apple.
that
Went
this
to
year
next.
for Musk?
Well, I'm saying, I'm just using Jobs as this kind of, this arc, right? And then back, kind of reclaims the crown for Jobs when he came out with the iPod at Apple and the iPhone and so on. And so I don't know if it's this year for Musk, but he's certainly gone from, hero to now controversial character. And I think that if we fast forward 5 years, I would be surprised if someone like him, number one, you have to fight to come back to be a hero again. And so you have to think about the person, right? Some people are maybe fine with just sort of fading into obscurity, but I don't really think he's that kind of a person.
Yeah.
And I don't think that he's going to let his career be defined by politics either. So again, this is just like a very philosophical thing. You think about betting on Elon, period. I think he's going to find a way to win big somehow and reclaim his story as being a hero in the minds of most people. Probably not everybody. Nobody's a hero for everybody, but I think he'll come back to that at some point.
Great note to end on. On behalf of this episode of Deep Tech, bye for now.